April 14th, 1943. Somewhere in the dense jungle 30 miles southwest of Lae, New Guinea, Second Lieutenant Robert Bob DeHaven crouched behind a moss-covered log, his hand trembling as he gripped the only weapon he had left, his standard-issue Colt M1911A1 .45 automatic pistol. 48 hours earlier, he'd been strapped into the cockpit of his P-38 Lightning, leading a fighter sweep over Japanese-held territory. Now, the twisted wreckage of that aircraft lay scattered across a ravine 2 miles behind him, smoke still rising from the shattered remains of its twin Allison engines. The voices were getting closer. Japanese. At least 4 soldiers, maybe more, moving through the undergrowth with the practiced efficiency of men who knew this terrain intimately. DeHaven's flight suit was torn. His left shoulder throbbed from the bailout, and his survival vest contained nothing more useful than a compass, a knife, and 7 rounds in his pistol's magazine. One more in the chamber. He listened to the footsteps crunching through the jungle floor, maybe 60 yards out now. The manual was clear: evade, hide, survive until rescue. But the Coast Watcher's radio had been destroyed in the crash. No one knew exactly where he was. The jungle stretched for hundreds of square miles in every direction. Then he heard the bolt of a rifle being worked, metal clicking against metal in the humid air. What happened in the next 17 minutes would become one of the most extraordinary survival stories in 5th Air Force history, a testament to split-second decision-making, marksmanship under impossible pressure, and the lethal effectiveness of a weapon most fighter pilots considered little more than a formality. By the spring of 1943, the Southwest Pacific Theater had become a brutal war of attrition fought over some of the most inhospitable terrain on Earth. General Douglas MacArthur's island-hopping campaign was grinding forward, but every mile gained came at tremendous cost. The 5th Air Force, operating from primitive airstrips carved out of jungle and coral, faced an enemy that controlled both the air and ground across vast stretches of New Guinea and the Solomon Islands. For American fighter pilots, the mission profile was unforgiving. Long-range patrols over enemy territory, often at the edge of a fuel capacity, meant that any mechanical failure, any burst of accurate anti-aircraft fire, any moment of bad luck could leave a pilot stranded hundreds of miles from friendly lines. The statistics were sobering. Of the pilots shot down over Japanese-held jungle in 1942 and early 1943, fewer than 30% made it back alive. Those who survived the bailout faced a gauntlet of threats: enemy patrols, tropical disease, starvation, and the sheer impossibility of navigation through dense rainforest. Standard survival equipment for Army Air Force's pilots included a .45 caliber pistol with 2 magazines, a machete, a first aid kit, and emergency rations. Designed to last 72 hours, the Colt M1911A1 automatic, 7 rounds of .45 ACP ammunition, capable of stopping power unmatched by any other sidearm in widespread military use, was meant primarily as a last resort defensive weapon or a signaling device. The weapon's effective range was listed at 50 meters under ideal conditions. Accuracy beyond 25 meters required exceptional skill and steady hands. What made survival in New Guinea particularly devastating was the Japanese military's tactical doctrine regarding downed airmen. Intelligence reports from Coast Watchers and Australian commandos operating behind enemy lines described systematic patrol patterns designed to locate and capture Allied pilots within hours of a crash. Japanese soldiers moved in small, disciplined units, often with native guides who knew every trail and water source. They were patient, methodical, and ruthless. 5th Air Force Commander General George Kenny had commissioned multiple studies on pilot survival rates by early 1943. The findings were grim. Pilots who attempted to evade on foot rarely covered more than 10 miles before exhaustion, dehydration, or injury forced them to stop. Those who engaged Japanese patrols with only sidearms almost never survived the encounter. The .45 automatic, while devastating at close range, couldn't match the range and firepower of enemy rifles and light machine guns. The tactical reality was straightforward. If you went down over enemy territory, your best hope was to hide until a rescue mission could reach you. Fighting was considered suicide. Every pilot in the Southwest Pacific knew the arithmetic. A Colt 45 held 8 rounds. A Japanese infantry patrol typically numbered 4 to 6 soldiers, each carrying an Arisaka Type 99 rifle with 5-round stripper clips and at least 40 rounds of ammunition. The enemy had range, firepower, and numbers. What they didn't always have was the element of surprise. Second Lieutenant Robert DeHaven, 22 years old from San Diego, California, had logged 847 combat hours in P-38 Lightnings by April 1943. He'd scored 6 confirmed aerial victories against Japanese fighters, zeros mostly, but also 2 Nakajima Ki-43 Oscars during a dogfight over Wewak. His squadron mates described him as methodical, precise, and unnervingly calm under pressure. He'd qualified as an expert marksman during training at Luke Field, Arizona, scoring 287 out of a possible 300 on the pistol range. But qualifying on a sunny Arizona firing range and fighting for your life in a New Guinea jungle were separated by an unbridgeable gulf of reality. No amount of training could prepare a man for what came next when the enemy closed in and 8 rounds were all that stood between survival and capture. Japanese tactical commanders in the Southwest Pacific had developed well-founded confidence in their infantry's ability to deal with downed Allied airmen. Combat reports from throughout 1942 documented dozens of successful captures or eliminations of American and Australian pilots who'd bailed out over Japanese-held territory. The pattern was consistent. Allied flyers, trained for aerial combat but not jungle warfare, typically exhausted themselves within 36 hours of crash landing. Dehydrated, disoriented, and armed only with pistols, they posed minimal threat to organized patrols. Lieutenant Colonel Yoshio Tsunoda, commanding Japanese forces in the Leh sector, had circulated a tactical bulletin to his infantry units in March 1943. The document, later recovered by Australian forces, outlined standard procedures for hunting downed airmen. American pilots carry only pistol-type weapons, it read. These have no effective range beyond 20 meters. Standard infantry tactics, maintain distance, use covering fire, advance in bounds, will neutralize any resistance. Capture is preferable for intelligence purposes, but elimination is acceptable if the pilot attempts to escape. What made the Japanese assessment particularly dangerous was that it was largely accurate. Throughout early 1943, American pilots who'd attempted to fight their way out of pursuit situations had universally failed. First Lieutenant James Watkins, shot down near Salamaua in February, had emptied his .45 at a Japanese patrol from approximately 40 yards. All 8 rounds missed, and he was killed by return rifle fire. Captain Thomas Mitchell, forced down in January, managed to wound 1 Japanese soldier in a close-range exchange before being overwhelmed by the soldier's squad mates. The mathematics simply didn't favor pistols against rifles. 5th Air Force intelligence officers recognized the problem but had no immediate solution. They couldn't equip pilots with rifles. The weight and bulk made them impractical in fighter cockpits already crammed with survival gear. They'd experimented with submachine guns, but the Thompson M1A1 was even heavier than a rifle and equally awkward. The .45 automatic remained standard issue because it was lightweight, reliable, and at least gave pilots some means of defense. Training protocols emphasized evasion over engagement. Your pistol is for desperate circumstances only, the survival manual stated plainly. Do not engage enemy patrols. Concealment is your primary defense. Pilots were drilled on this principle: hide, evade, survive until rescue. Fighting was a last resort, to be avoided at nearly any cost. But doctrine and reality diverged in the jungle. When enemy soldiers were 20 yards away and closing, when hiding was no longer possible, when the choice became fight or surrender, the manual's advice offered little comfort. DeHaven understood this as he heard the Japanese patrol drawing closer through the undergrowth. Intelligence estimates suggested he was at least 70 miles from the nearest Allied position. The coast watchers couldn't reach him. Rescue was days away at best. He had 8 rounds, and perhaps 90 seconds before the enemy reached his position. Then came the decision that would define the rest of his life. He wasn't going to hide anymore. Before we continue, I'd love to know where you're watching from and what you know about fighter pilot survival in the Pacific Theater. Drop a comment below and let me know if you'd heard about pilots using sidearms in ground combat before, and if you're enjoying these deep dives into World War II aviation history, hit that subscribe button. These stories take serious research to get the details right, and knowing you're out there makes it all worthwhile. Robert DeHaven had spent 2 days moving through jungle so dense that sunlight barely penetrated the canopy. After bailing out at 4,000 feet, his parachute had caught in the trees, leaving him dangling 30 feet above the ground. The climb down had wrenched his shoulder. His emergency radio was smashed. His water was gone. And now, crouched behind fallen timber as a Japanese patrol closed in, he made a calculation that went against every instinct his training had drilled into him. He wasn't going to run. He was going to attack. The Japanese soldiers were moving in a standard search pattern. 2 men forward as scouts, 2 more trailing 20 yards behind. They were calling to each other, coordinating their sweep through the dense undergrowth. DeHaven estimated the lead scout was 45 yards out, too far for reliable pistol work by conventional standards. But DeHaven had never been conventional. During training at Luke Field, his marksmanship instructor had noticed something unusual. Where most shooters rush their shots with the .45, fighting the weapon's substantial recoil and muzzle flip, DeHaven had developed an almost mechanical rhythm. Exhale, front sight, squeeze. The Colt M1911A1 kicked hard. 230 grain bullets leaving the barrel at 830 feet per second generated serious recoil. But DeHaven had learned to ride it, to use the recoil to reset his sight picture for the next shot. He drew the pistol from his shoulder holster. 7 rounds in the magazine, 1 in the chamber, 8 total. The first Japanese soldier appeared through a gap in the vegetation, his Arisaka Type 99 rifle held at the ready. The range was 38 yards. DeHaven estimated it instinctively from years of calculating deflection angles in aerial combat. The soldier was scanning left, not yet focused on DeHaven's position. DeHaven's hands steadied. The trembling from adrenaline smoothed into something colder, more controlled. He'd learned this state in the cockpit during his first dogfight over WWII, the moment when panic transformed into hyperfocus, when time seemed to dilate and every detail sharpened. He raised the Colt, a 2-handed grip, front sight centered on the soldier's chest. The shot cracked through the jungle like a thunderbolt. The soldier dropped, the rifle clattering against roots and vines. DeHaven had already moved, shifting position 3 yards to his right behind a thick tree trunk, the Colt tracking for the next target. The element of surprise was gone now. The remaining 3 Japanese soldiers were shouting, trying to identify where the shot had come from. 7 rounds left. The second soldier appeared, moving toward where his comrade had fallen. He was scanning the jungle, rifle raised, finger on the trigger. 28 yards. DeHaven waited one more second as the soldier stepped into a clear line of sight between two trees. The second shot took him high in the chest. He stumbled backward and fell. 6 rounds left. Now, the remaining 2 soldiers were reacting with trained discipline. DeHaven heard them calling to each other, coordinating fields of fire. They'd identified his approximate position from the muzzle flash. Return fire cracked through the trees, 6.5mm rounds snapping through foliage and thudding into tree trunks. The Japanese weren't panicking. They were executing standard infantry tactics: suppress the enemy position, advance under covering fire. DeHaven stayed low, moving again, crawling through mud and decomposing leaves to a position 15 yards from his previous spot. His shoulder screamed in pain. He could hear one of the soldiers moving through the brush to his left, attempting to flank. The other was maintaining suppressing fire, short controlled bursts. The flanking soldier appeared at 22 yards, moving cautiously but steadily. He was sweeping his rifle barrel in an arc, searching for movement. DeHaven fired from a prone position, bracing the Colt against the ground for stability. The shot caught the soldier in the upper torso. He went down hard. 5 rounds left. 1 enemy soldier remaining. The jungle went silent, except for the drip of water from the canopy and the harsh rasp of DeHaven's breathing. The final Japanese soldier had stopped firing. He was somewhere out there in the dense undergrowth, probably repositioning, trying to locate DeHaven's new position. 30 seconds passed. Then a minute. DeHaven's hands were slick with sweat and mud. The Colt felt impossibly heavy. His training screamed at him to move again, to keep repositioning. But something deeper, instinct perhaps, or combat-sharpened intuition, told him to wait. Movement. 35 yards, slightly behind his position. The soldier had circled wide, attempting to come at DeHaven from an unexpected angle. It was good tactics. It almost worked. DeHaven rolled, bringing the pistol up as the soldier emerged from behind a massive tree trunk. They saw each other in the same instant. The soldier was already raising his rifle. DeHaven was faster. The 4th shot echoed through the jungle. The soldier collapsed. 4 rounds left in the Colt. 4 enemy soldiers down. The immediate threat was neutralized, but DeHaven knew the tactical situation remained dire. Gunfire carried in the jungle. Other patrols would have heard it. They'd be converging on his position within the hour. He had to move. He approached each fallen soldier carefully, pistol ready, and collected their rifles and ammunition. The Arisaka Type 99 was a bolt-action weapon, accurate and reliable. He now had 3 rifles and approximately 120 rounds of 6.5mm ammunition. The tactical equation had shifted dramatically. What American intelligence officers would later document from DeHaven's debriefing was the precision of the engagement. 4 shots, 4 hits, at ranges between 22 and 38 yards under extreme stress, with a weapon most experts considered marginally accurate beyond 15 yards. It shouldn't have been possible. But statistics don't account for individual skill under pressure. DeHaven moved deeper into the jungle, heading southwest toward the coast, now armed well enough to survive until rescue could reach him. When Robert DeHaven finally reached Allied lines 6 days later, guided by a coast watcher who'd picked up his signal mirror flash, his story initially met with skepticism. Intelligence officers at 5th Air Force Headquarters in Port Moresby had documented dozens of survival accounts, but none described a successful engagement against a full Japanese patrol using only a sidearm. The tactical mathematics simply didn't support it. But DeHaven had brought physical evidence. 3 Japanese rifles, maps recovered from the fallen soldiers showing patrol routes, and documentation that provided valuable intelligence on enemy dispositions around Leh. More importantly, he'd brought something else: a detailed account of what had made the difference between death and survival. During the extensive debriefing that followed, DeHaven described his approach to pistol marksmanship in terms that surprised the intelligence officers. He didn't attribute his success to luck or desperation. He described it as an extension of the deflection shooting he'd mastered in aerial combat. In a dogfight, you're calculating angles, lead, and closure rate while pulling Gs and tracking a target moving at 300 miles per hour, he explained to Major William Thompson, 5th Air Force Intelligence. The principles transfer to ground combat. The target is the same problem, moving, partially obscured, requiring precise timing. The only difference is the scale. What DeHaven had done, military analysts later realized, was apply fighter pilot methodology to pistol combat. Where infantry training emphasized rapid fire and volume, DeHaven had used single, precisely aimed shots. Where conventional doctrine said to seek cover and avoid engagement, he'd seized initiative and attacked. Where standard tactics suggested pistols were defensive weapons only, he'd used the .45 as an offensive tool. The 5th Air Force immediately began analyzing whether DeHaven's success could be replicated. They brought him to Luke Field to demonstrate his technique to pistol instructors. What they discovered was both encouraging and sobering. DeHaven's marksmanship wasn't supernatural. It was the result of exceptional eye-hand coordination, combat experience that taught instinctive range estimation, and hundreds of hours of practice. The technique could be taught, but it required time and natural aptitude that most pilots simply didn't possess. Nevertheless, the tactical implications were significant. 5th Air Force revised its survival training protocols to include extended pistol instruction. Rather than teaching pilots to fire rapidly and hope for hits, instructors began emphasizing DeHaven's approach, deliberate aimed fire, using cover effectively, and treating the pistol as a precision instrument rather than a last resort noisemaker. More critically, DeHaven's engagement demonstrated that the Japanese tactical assessment of downed pilots was exploitable. Enemy patrols had grown complacent, assuming that American flyers would either hide or surrender when cornered. They weren't prepared for aggressive, accurate return fire from what they'd dismissed as ineffective weapons. Intelligence bulletins circulated throughout the 5th and 13th Air Forces in May 1943 included DeHaven's engagement as a case study. While evasion remains the primary survival tactic, the bulletin read, pilots should understand that engagement may be tactically viable under specific conditions. The M1911A1 pistol, in the hands of a trained marksman at ranges under 40 yards, is a lethal weapon capable of neutralizing enemy infantry. The psychological impact on pilot morale was equally significant. Before DeHaven's engagement, being shot down over enemy territory meant almost certain death or capture. After, pilots understood that skilled marksmanship and aggressive tactics provided a genuine survival option. The .45 automatic, previously dismissed by many as deadweight, suddenly became a weapon pilots took seriously. Training hours dedicated to pistol qualification increased by 40% across the Southwest Pacific Theater by June 1943. Qualification standards became more rigorous. The weapon that had been an afterthought became a priority. Robert DeHaven returned to flight status 3 weeks after his jungle ordeal. His shoulder healed cleanly, and by June 1943, he was back in the cockpit of a P-38 Lightning, leading fighter sweeps over the same territory where he'd nearly died. By war's end, he'd accumulated 14 confirmed aerial victories, making him one of the Pacific Theater's leading aces. He survived the war, returned to California, and flew commercially for Western Airlines for 32 years. But his legacy extended far beyond his personal kill count. The engagement that intelligence officers had initially doubted became required study material at every Army Air Force's survival school. By late 1943, pistol qualification scores across the 5th Air Force had increased by an average of 32%. Pilots were taking marksmanship seriously for the first time, recognizing that 8 rounds, properly placed, could mean the difference between death and survival. Statistical analysis conducted by 5th Air Force Intelligence in 1944 showed a measurable improvement in pilot survival rates following implementation of the revised training protocols. Of the 127 pilots shot down over Japanese-held territory in the Southwest Pacific between June 1943 and December 1944, 43 made it back to Allied lines, a survival rate of 34%, compared to the 28% rate documented in 1942 and early 1943. While multiple factors contributed to this improvement, better rescue coordination, Coast Watcher networks, and improved survival equipment, intelligence officers credited enhanced weapons training as a significant element. The tactical shift also influenced Japanese patrol behavior. Intelligence intercepts from mid-1943 onward showed that Japanese commanders had revised their assessment of downed Allied pilots as minimal threats. Patrol units began approaching crash sites with greater caution, anticipating resistance. This wariness, ironically, sometimes provided Allied pilots with additional time to evade before patrols closed in. The M1911A1 pistol itself gained renewed respect throughout the military. While it had always been recognized as a powerful close-quarters weapon, DeHaven's engagement demonstrated that in skilled hands, its effective range extended well beyond the conventional 20-yard estimates. Post-war testing by Army Ordnance Specialists confirmed that accurate fire at ranges up to 50 yards was achievable by marksmen with proper training and stable shooting positions. DeHaven rarely discussed the engagement publicly. In a 1987 interview with aviation historian John Stanaway, he was characteristically modest. "I did what any pilot would do when the alternatives ran out," he said. "The training kicked in. The weapon worked. I got lucky with the angles and timing. That's all it was." But those who'd analyzed the engagement understood it was more than luck. It was precision, aggression, and the application of fighter pilot instincts to an environment where those qualities weren't supposed to matter. 4 shots, 4 hits. 4 enemy soldiers neutralized in less than 2 minutes of combat that, by all conventional tactical assessment, should have resulted in the pilot's death or capture. Today, the M1911A1 that DeHaven carried through the New Guinea jungle resides in the collection of the National Museum of the United States Air Force at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. The weapon's serial number, 1605894, is documented in 5th Air Force after-action reports as having been recovered from DeHaven's survival vest during his post-rescue debriefing. War teaches lessons that peacetime prefers to forget. One of those lessons is that weapons don't succeed or fail in abstract terms. They succeed or fail in human hands under specific circumstances. The Colt M1911A1 hadn't changed when Robert DeHaven faced that Japanese patrol in April 1943. The weapon's ballistics, its recoil characteristics, its mechanical reliability, all remained constant. What changed was the understanding that a tool is only as limited as the person wielding it. Fighter pilots spend thousands of hours mastering precision under pressure, calculating deflection angles in 3 dimensions while pulling punishing G-forces, making life-or-death decisions in fractions of a second, maintaining focus when fear and adrenaline demand panic. These skills, developed for aerial combat, proved transferable to a jungle engagement where conventional wisdom said pistols couldn't compete with rifles. The broader truth extends beyond marksmanship. Doctrine and tactics provide essential frameworks, but they're guidelines, not absolute laws. Sometimes survival demands violating established procedure, attacking when doctrine says hide, engaging when wisdom says evade, trusting individual skill when statistics predict failure, 8 rounds in a magazine, 4 enemy soldiers in the jungle, 1 pilot who refused to accept that the mathematics guaranteed his death. 38 years later, when someone asked DeHaven what he'd learned from that day in New Guinea, he answered simply, "Never let anyone tell you what's impossible when your life depends on proving them wrong." Sometimes the weapon you've underestimated is yourself. If you found this story as fascinating as I did researching it, I'd appreciate if you'd like this video and subscribe to the channel. There are dozens more untold stories from World War II that deserve to be remembered, and I'll be bringing you a new one every week. What should I cover next? Let me know in the comments below.